It enables faster fills, better execution, and gasless trading. We're working with like Phantom and Solana Foundation on making it so it shows up pretty in your wallet when you sign messages. And we ultimately expect other teams will probably follow along and use message signing as well.
Okay, good drift everyone. Welcome to Under the Hood episode 1. So this is Drift's new show where we lift the hood on all things drift so you can understand what's happening under the hood. So welcome Lil Perp.
Happy to be here.
All right, fantastic. So yeah, Chris, obviously this week we had the big launch of Swift protocol, which was much anticipated and much teased. So yeah, what I want to do today on episode 1 is spend a bit of time with you to basically just ask lots of questions about Swift protocol and try and keep it as layman's terms as possible, as relatable as possible, and try and bridge the gap between the white paper, which you released last week, and then sort of that high level TLDR summary. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to skip forward, give the viewers, if they haven't seen it yet, a sense of what the white paper actually looks like. So yeah, Swift protocol, it's a new trading standard for perps and spot on Solana, though I think spot is in the works. Did you just want to give us a quick TLDR on Swift, Chris, and maybe just introduce yourself as well?
Well, yep. So I'm one of the co-founders of Drift. On the technical side, work a lot on the program and just all around dev side. For Swift, so Swift is an extension of Drift. It enables faster fills, better execution, and gasless trading. And the way it enables this is by basically speeding up the time or making it faster for a user to send their order to market makers. So currently, or how it previously worked on Drift, was for a user to submit an order, they actually needed to place a transaction and have that land on Solana. And then once that transaction landed, market makers could see a user's order and fill it. Now with Swift, a user can sign a message which encodes their order information, and they can broadcast that directly to market makers without placing a transaction, which basically greatly speeds up how fast you can get filled. And then the other benefit of that is because the market maker is submitting a transaction with your signed message, you also get gasless trading.
All right, so faster, cheaper, better is probably the three things there. So really IBRL leaning into the Solana ethos. I also did sort of mess up my ordering of the slides here, it seems, for episode 1. So just Chris Heaney, for those who don't know, you can find him on Twitter there. That's his handle. He's the co-founder of Drift, king of the devs. And then myself here, so I'm James. I look after things strategy and growth at Drift. Do slides and host this show now. So you can expect to see more of me in this format. All right, so we've just done the what is Swift, and then I might just go through some of the questions and then just riff off those that pop up as we go. All right, so I think you touched a little bit on what it actually is, Chris, but what about sort of like why it came about? What was the need?
Yeah, so the need was just to make trading on Drift faster. So for a little bit of context and history, Drift's always been designed around this idea of just-in-time liquidity, which enables market makers to basically fill users as their orders come in instead of leaving quotes on an AMM or an order book. And this is important, the just-in-time liquidity concept, because it's actually really hard to market make on chain. Maybe that's something we can touch on. So Drift for a long time has been designed around just-in-time liquidity because in the long run, we were confident that would lead to more market makers integrating and ultimately better liquidity on chain. The issue with the first iteration of it was it was a bit slower than users are used to, where they can get trades through in one transaction. So Swift is basically an upgrade to the just-in-time liquidity, so you can get filled within one slot, one transaction, but still be filled using just-in-time liquidity. Does that make sense?
Yep. So there's a lot to unpack in that. A lot of assumed knowledge. So why was it advantageous to do this for the market maker side? You did mention sort of market makers filling. Maybe you can just lean on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so in like a traditional model with a like a AMM or an order book, market makers will like put quotes there. So they'll say like, "I'll buy and I'll sell at this price," and then you as a user, when you come and trade against it, you just send a transaction and you fill against those like resting quotes. Um, the issue with that on like a blockchain versus something like a SEX is there's a lot of arbitrageurs or like users that have like fast information that are like basically trading against these market makers, picking them off, and like the market makers lose money. So what ends up happening is to compensate for losing money, the market makers start quoting wider and wider. So as a user, you end up getting worse prices. So what we wanted to do is like, okay, we know market makers don't really like quoting on these order books on chain right now because it's too disadvantageous to them. So we're going to allow for them to do this thing called just-in-time liquidity, where a user actually is going to submit their order, and then market makers can race to fill them at the best price possible. And by doing this, like market makers will get arbitrage less, and because of that, they'll actually be willing to give normal users a better price. Um, so this just-in-time liquidity is like kind of like a it's becoming more and more popular as a kind of design on blockchains. Jupiter's JupZ, which is RFQ model, is I would also consider that just-in-time liquidity, and it's really just a way to make it so market makers can provide better prices to like normal users.
All right. So sounds like the just in time is a real key focus of Swift, like one of the core principles. But as I understood, Swift was sort of aggregating different types of liquidity. So could you just explain a little bit more about that and how it's actually working from the liquidity side?
Yeah, so Drift is an auction-based trading protocol. So every market order has an auction, and what that means is you have a start price and an end price, and basically every Solana block or slot, the price is slowly getting worse. Um, and so what this does is it tries to make it so that like you can't instantly get filled at a bad price. That's an issue that sometimes happens on blockchains where you say your slippage price is like 1% above the current fair value price, and then like an MEV bot sandwiches you and you fill at that absolute worst price immediately. So an auction is a way to get around this, where like each slot you're like trying to fill at a slightly worse price until you finally cross whoever's willing to fill you. And so on Drift, you have an auction, and then a market maker can come in and provide just-in-time liquidity, or we have these things called keeper bots, which are basically just monitoring users' orders. And what they can do is they can take your auction and they can fill you against one, the Drift's AMM, which is kind of this like protocol owned backstop liquidity, or it can fill you against another user who's placed a limit order on the order book and also wants to be filled. So Drift, you can get filled by just time liquidity, the AMM, or orders on the order book. And Swift aggregates over all of those. Um, the really like the reason we focus on the just in time makers is because on Drift we have a lot of these JIT makers who actually fill users at really good prices, but you can't see their liquidity on the order book, which can be a little bit confusing to users at first. But yeah, like you're saying, we actually have three different liquidity sources, and the goal is to make them compete with each other such that users get better fills overall.
All right. I feel like that's a pretty good summary. There's lots of terminology in there which we might dig into later, but I think we've sort of covered off on the how it works. But maybe if you could just explain to us how, you mentioned in the old way in which these auctions and orders were placed, there was a transaction that had to hit the layer one. So that's Solana layer one. When a person shows up, they click the button in the UI. Something has to hit the layer one, and then the keeper network sort of looks to initiate that and match that auction with the makers and the takers, and then so there's another transaction that has to occur. So how is Swift different to that, and how does that bit actually work? The different part.
Yeah, so basically, how it works now is you can use cryptography where a user uses their wallet or their private public key pair to sign their order messages. So they're able to sign it, and we're able to basically get a signature from that. And then what you can do is you can take that signed order message and you can just propagate it off chain to the market makers and to the keepers directly without having to go to the underlying blockchain. Um, so the intermediary between like you signing that message and then it getting sent to market makers and keepers is a Swift node. So the Swift, like the UI will basically know how to send to the Swift node, and then market makers and keepers can subscribe to updates from the Swift node. Um, and so this kind of pattern revolves around the idea of using signatures and signing messages. And you can do that instead of having to sign a whole transaction. And so this is a pattern that actually has already kind of been fleshed out on Ethereum. They have EIP 712 signatures, and there's actually similar functionality available on Solana. And we're one of the first teams to kind of use it in like a normal DeFi UI. We're working with like Phantom and Solana Foundation on making it so it shows up pretty in your wallet when you sign messages. And we ultimately expect other teams will probably follow along and use message signing as well.
All right, that's cool. I like that you touched on that this is something new to Solana, and this is something that we're actually spearheading, and that there's already a parallel in Ethereum which has sort of proven this concept out. Okay, so that does make me wonder, what is the user actually signing? So what's in that? What's in that message?
Good question. So it's basically like all the information you need to do a market order. So it's the size, it's the auction start price, the auction end price, your slippage price, how long the auction will last. A lot of this stuff is just calculated like under the hood on the Drift UI. But obviously, like you're putting in the size on how much you want to trade and stuff like that. So it's just like all the contents to basically do a market order on Drift. That's what you're signing.
And what are the market makers and what do the keepers see?
Yeah, so they see that message that you signed. So you sign the message, you send it to Swift node. The Swift node says it's the market makers, and then the market makers can basically get the normal contents. They see the size and the price you're trying to trade at, and if it crosses the price, like they're willing to buy or sell from you at that price, then they'll bundle your message with in their own transaction, and then they'll send that to the L1 to like actually execute the trade. So all the trades fundamentally are like executed on the L1 itself.
Okay, so basically what you just said, Chris, is that the market makers and the keepers can basically see the parameters of that order that the user submits. So let's say they want a long sol perp. There's some parameters around that order. They hit submit. It goes to this sort of Swift network, this node, and then that sort of node relays that message, that encrypted message to market makers and the keeper network. So where does the auction happen? Where does the auction fit into this? So you explained in the beginning that on Drift, when a user places an order, there's an auction that takes place over a period of time, which tries to get the user the best price possible. So can you just explain to us where that auction actually takes place? Is it on this Swift network or is it somewhere else?
That's a good question. So actually, all the auction, like the increments in the auction, are all based on Solana slots, and the slot is just like a block number. So when you sign a message, you actually also sign the slot that you want the auction to start at on chain, and then basically because you sign the slot that you want the auction to start, like market makers can see the blockchain slots incrementing, and they can calculate what your price would be if they sent the trade right this moment, or they can wait until like the auction price advances far enough where your price matches with their price. So fundamentally, the auction is done on chain, but it's inferred off chain what the current price is. Um, And so when the UI, when you're signing a message, it adds a slot, and then it looks at the current slot and it adds a little bit of a buffer to it, so that to account for like some latency between when you sign it and actually send it to market makers.
All right. So just to give a real life example or a hypothetical example, let's say I click a button in the UI. I want to trade a Sol Perp using Swift. You're a market maker. You see my order that is streamed to you via the Swift protocol relayer, and then what you would do is you would then see what price I was willing to pay, the size of my order. You would then sort of send an order to the L1 off the Swift network saying, I want to fill that specific taker at this specific price. Is that correct?
Yes, except the market maker doesn't need to send anything back to Swift. The market maker just bundles the message into a transaction and sends it directly to Solana. So Swift doesn't have to do anything with posting transactions like the node itself. All it is doing is relaying messages off chain.
All right, there's a few things that I want to ask on that, but I'll ask them later. So this does kind of raise an obvious question for a lot of people, which is this actually an L2? How would you how would you answer that?
Yeah, so this isn't an L2. The
To reiterate,
primary,
it isn't an L2. Do not
it
get
is
that confused, people.
It is not an L2. It's really just a message passing interface or protocol. If you had to really like try to come up with some technical jargon, so an L2 is where you're basically what you call like executing state or doing state updates off chain, and then you have this sequencer which bundles them all together and posts them on chain. So there's just like usually in the current Ethereum ones, there's like a permission centralized sequencer that like posts all these updates. Versus for Swift and Drift, we still have all the market makers and keepers submitting the transactions that actually lead to the trade being executed, and any of those keepers or market makers can submit the transaction. And the reason it's like this is because all the trades are fundamentally executed on the L1, and also it's like worth bringing up that all the funds remain like locked on the L1. So all you're really doing with Swift is like passing the information about an order to the market makers and keepers. There's nothing that's like there's no one that's like responsible, one entity for that's responsible for posting like all these trades and could potentially like rug you in some way. Um, so yeah, L2 is kind of like this technical jargon that a lot of people don't understand. I mean, for a normal user, it probably doesn't really matter. I guess the important thing to know is like if Swift goes down and you're using Swift, you can always still post a normal transaction to place your order, and you can definitely always just do a normal transaction to deposit or withdraw as well.
All right, I feel like you may have answered some of my upcoming questions there, so
Oh.
I might just skip ahead. Skip ahead a bit. I think you've answered the L2 question there, and I think that the TLDR is the reason why it's not an L2, if I understood you correctly, is because there's no change of state of user balances or anything like that that's happening with Swift. All it is it's essentially saying this user intends to do something on the layer one, and then it's basically coordinating around that such that the action can actually occur on the Solana layer one at a future point in time. Is that a reasonable summary?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, fantastic. So I think maybe a quick divergence here. Would you consider that intense? I know that's a word that's been thrown around here as a parallel.
Yeah, you could call it an intent. I think intent was kind of like a buzzword for L2 bridging. So marketing told me to not use that, but you could call it an
Ah,
intent.
okay.
But
Sorry,
Drift's
marketing.
no, Drift's always been in like we've always basically been an intent protocol, right? Because we always did auction or V2 has always been one. Um, it's just like was never the buzzword we used to describe it.
Yep. All right, cool. Well, before I get in any more trouble with marketing, I'll skip ahead. Um, maybe we can touch on some of the benefits again, just to reiterate. So basically, what you've just said is that we're pulling some of the some of those parameters off chain to basically speed up the process. So maybe you could just reiterate, like, what are some of the benefits of this specific implementation, what it enables, and in what circumstances? Say when the network's congested, like how would this be better?
Right. Yeah. So the immediate benefits are one, it's faster generally for you to trade because you don't have to do that one transaction and wait for that to land before the second transaction to actually the market maker, the keeper to fill you to go through. So it's typically faster. It's also less expensive because you're not paying gas because the market maker and the keeper are submitting the transaction for you, which during congestion is actually pretty important because market makers and keepers have these like really smart bots that are good at sending transactions and they generally are willing to pay more than a normal user is. So it also makes it easier to trade when things are congested. And so those are the immediate benefits. A side effect of the fact that it's faster is that you actually will tend to get better fills because this auction is happening, like market makers understand the auction parameters faster. And so they're able also to fill you in the beginning of your auction when you're requesting a better price. What can happen in the old way on Solana is when you submit a transaction, there can be some latency between when you submit it and when it actually lands, and then when market makers actually hear about it. And by then, the price can actually move against you, and you could get filled at a worse price. So by making this whole process faster, it's more likely you get filled at a good price as well. And so that's kind of like that one's less of a direct technical benefit, but more just like uh, a second order kind of benefit or consequence.
All right, that makes sense. So, yeah, just again to reiterate, it sounds like it's just faster for users. It's cheaper, and it's basically better because in those moments of congestion, there's sort of less things that have to hit the L1, which means there's less sort of opportunity for things to go wrong in those network congestion periods, like the Trump weekend, for example. All right. I think we talked a little bit about the auction piece earlier, so I might just skip past this one. And just for those joining, just to reiterate, the auction isn't actually happening sort of on the Swift protocol. It's actually still happening at that layer one. It's just sort of we're speeding up the time that it takes to get to that stage with this implementation. I think we might have already touched on this, but maybe you could just reiterate for us here, Chris. Are we trusting Swift with our funds?
No, you're not. Swift is just a way for you to send your order to a market maker and keeper. All the funds are still on the L1, and actually, all deposit and withdraw transactions still go through the L1. They don't. Swift doesn't touch anything to do with funds, just for placing trades. Eventually, I guess the caveat here is eventually when you do spot trades, that could lead to a change in the assets you have in your Drift account. But again, it's not escrowing or custodying any of your funds.
And that's because all it's doing is letting the user sign a message from their wallet of what they want to do. And then all of the value exchange is happening on that L1 based on the outcomes of that signed message. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's like you're basically just placing a market order and signing like I want to do this market order.
All right. Sounds good. You did mention gasless. How is it gasless? And gasless for whom?
Yeah, so it's gasless for the user submitting the market order, or, aka the taker. The reason it can be gasless is because the market makers and the keepers are willing to pay to submit your transaction. And actually, this it already works this way, where when you are submitting orders, market makers and keepers are already submitting transactions to fill you. Um, so there's actually no net new cost on these people. It's just we're removing the fact that like you need to submit your transaction first. And so market makers and keepers are happy to submit your order for you. There's no like hidden subsidy that's gonna like eventually run out. It's just we're facilitating you sending your order to these market makers and keepers without needing to pay gas.
All right. So that makes sense to me, but it does sort of raise the question for me if I'm sending a message via Swift of something that I want to do, and market makers are competing with each other to fill that order, can it get filled twice?
No, so that would be bad if it could. So basically, like on chain, when they submit an order, like a Swift order message, we like the program will record that that Swift order has been processed and been placed. And if the second market maker comes to try to place your order again, it'll basically fail. So there's record keeping going on for when a Swift message is finally placed, and from there, once it's placed, it just like goes through the normal order flow where like multiple you can get partial fills, etc. But there's no way to have the same order placed twice because of this record keeping.
Okay, and why is it that there is no way for that to happen? Is that because there's only one signature, and because there's like a block reference in those parameters that are stored inside that message? Like, what is the
You
control?
so every time you sign a Swift message, it generates a unique ID inside, and you sign the unique ID, and then when you place the message on chain, the Drift program stores that it's already seen this UUID, and so if you go place the same um, like if someone goes to place the same signed message, it'll see that there's this unique ID that's already in like a table recording what orders have already been placed. And if it sees that, then it'll basically like block it from being placed a second time. So there's a unique ID attached to like every Swift message.
Yeah. And so, there's two market makers. They're both trying to send the message to Solana layer one to fill our order. What does that second market maker see when it doesn't work? Does the transaction just get rejected? What happens?
It kind of depends what happened to the first market maker. So if the first market maker filled you completely, like it took your whole order, then the second person will fail. If the first market maker just fills you halfway, the second market maker can fill you additionally. So a cool thing about Swift is like for one order, there can be multiple market makers that all fill you. And this is different than say an RFQ where like you end up only filling against one market maker. So for like bigger orders, this tends to work well where one market maker might not want to fill you the whole way at a certain price.
So does that sort of lead us to a future where we could have bigger and bigger volumes of trading activity on Drift, on Swift protocol, and more market makers who are basically all just partially filling different orders across the board to create this really deep liquidity pool for perps? Is that the longer term vision here?
Yeah, definitely. We wanted it to be so that multiple market makers can fill the same user. So you're able to like basically aggregate against all these JIT makers instead of just taking an inferior price from one.
Yep. And I know it's called Swift protocol, and there's certain things implied with the term protocol. I'm wondering, given that this is aggregating different types of liquidity, will that liquidity be opened up to more sources in the future, and will this go beyond Drift? So, for example, right now,
Um,
the AMM liquidity is just Drift's VAMM, but will we expect other protocols' AMMs to plug in?
so for perps are non-fungible inherently. So for perps, it'll only work on Drift. For spot, Drift spot system actually already routes orders to OpenBook Phoenix. In the future, it'll probably route to other AMMs. So when we launch Swift for spot, yeah, it'll be able to fill against other spot dexes. And the thing with Swift right now is it's designed to work with. You need a Drift user account to make it work. Anyone can still integrate with Swift if they wanted to, especially on the spot side. Just the caveat being where you would need to initialize a Drift account in order to use it.
All right, so it sounds like Spot is the next big thing. And do you have an update for us on sort of what we're thinking with Spot? Rough high level timelines.
Um, so Spot isn't that much work from just like the Swift side, like the backend side. It's more building the UI around it and making it nice. That would take a bit longer. We do want to launch a Spot Swift type UI that looks like a more traditional aggregator. So, I'd say on the order of by summer we would do it. I don't know when. It kind of depends when we decide we want to go all in on that.
All right, so that sounds like some alpha there. And so will that make the spot trading experience on Drift even better? Is that the intention?
Yeah, and also just a UI that maybe users are more familiar with trading too. Right now, we have perp market makers that actually would be willing to do spot volume. It's just not necessarily enough flow to warrant it. So, yeah, doing a new UI that people like and like buzz, like getting some hype and trying to get the kind of the flywheel going with liquidity is definitely needed. But upon doing that, yeah, the spot trading on Drift would be a lot better.
All right. Well, where should users go to get started to give this a try? Like, where would you point people, Crisp?
I mean, just just go to app.drift.trade, trade Soul Perp. Hopefully, maybe the bottom's in, or if you don't think the bottom's in, if you think we're going lower, you can short too.
Generational bottom. What do you think?
I don't know if the bottom's in yet, but it might be close. I don't know.
Not financial advice.
Yeah, clearly not financial advice. I don't know anything about macro, but it's funny because some people waste their time trading meme coins. I waste my time trying to understand macro and listen to podcasts about it. So, but I still know nothing.
I'm also a macro larp, so I understand. All right. So, and once users jump on app.drift.trade, how would they actually use Swift, given that this is opt-in?
Yeah, currently, if you already have a Drift account, if you turn on the Swift toggle, you're gonna have to create this Swift orders account, which is actually the thing we talked about that dedupes Swift orders for you. And then once you initialize that account, basically anytime the toggle's on, your order will just get routed through Swift. And yeah, the toggles in the trade modal for people who couldn't find it before. And then eventually we'll just make Swift the default and it'll be more just like you won't have to use the toggle per se. It'll just automatically go through Swift if Swift is enabled.
All right.
Or maybe in the settings you could turn it off if you have to or something. But yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like everyone's welcome to go and give it a try. Hopefully, you have a great experience using Swift, and give us some feedback as well. You can leave it in Discord or Twitter, or you can just DM Lil Perp directly and give him all of your praise or scrutiny or criticisms. I might just bump over to Squid here and just see if there were any questions that popped up, because we've got a little bit of time, just a few minutes left. So, Squid, did you want to let us know if there were any questions that popped up before we wrap?
I think the only question I saw was what are the upcoming plans with Fuel? So maybe you could take that one.
Okay, Fuel. We were planning a separate under the hood for Fuel, but maybe I'll give you the high level now for those listening. So, Fuel, we're actually launching a big upgrade to our vaults, and so Fuel for vaults is coming very soon. So we're updating our UI, and we've sort of figured out a better way to show the fuel that users are earning in vault deposits. So previously that wasn't something that we were tracking or showing, but that'll be happening imminently. So that's probably the next big thing for those of you who are enjoying our vaults. You'll be also earning fuel on the trading activity of those vaults, as well as the deposits in those vaults. So that's something to look forward to. Separately to that, we're also looking at expanding our fuel across our borrow lend. So if you're a Drift user, you'll know that Drift is both a borrow lend and a perp dex, as well as other things. So we're looking at expanding how we can reward certain activities across the borrow lend. All right. So yeah, I guess Chris, I might just leave the final words to you. So what's next, and what do our users have to look forward to as it pertains to Swift or other?
Yeah, so Swift should keep improving. We still have a few JIT makers that already do a lot of volume that aren't on Swift. So once they're on there, it should be Swift trading should be even better. Um, so that's kind of like the immediate term for Swift. And then looking ahead, definitely looking forward to enabling it for Spot. Should be cool. That'll be our first foray into doing something like a spot aggregator, at least a spot aggregator type UI. And then I guess the other thing to be on the lookout for is we're going to start working on a new tokenized LP type project similar to JLP. So that should be rolling out hopefully by summertime as well, which will plug into Swift and make the virtual AM liquidity even better. And yeah, I mean, we're just going to keep working on making things better during this little bear trend. So this is a good time to hunker down and keep optimizing. So I'm excited for that.
So much alpha, so much to look forward to. Thanks for joining us, Chris. But thanks for dropping all those nice big bombs there at the end of things that people have to look forward to.
It's always in the GitHub. I wouldn't share if it wasn't already in the GitHub. So
there are no secrets in GitHub.
yeah.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Thanks everyone for joining episode 1 of Under the Hood. And you can expect to see more of these coming very soon. All right. Thanks everyone. Cheers.
Yep.